The cameras rolled. The stage lights burned bright. The audience sat in eager anticipation. This was the Mark Halstead Show Point, one of the biggest talk shows in America. A machine built on controversy, on viral moments, on guests walking in confident and walking out embarrassed. Tonight, Mark Halstead had his target locked. Sylvester Stallone, the legend, the man who built a career playing fighters, survivors, and men who never quit. But tonight, Halstead wasn't here to celebrate him. He was here to break him. The applause died down. Halstead leaned forward, smiled, the kind of smile that came right before the trap was sprung. "Mr. Stallone," he said, his voice smooth and professional. "For decades, you've played these hypermasculine, old-school tough guys. But in today's world, don't you think that kind of masculinity is outdated?" A few chuckles in the crowd. Some nods. This was what they came for. Halstead's fans. The ones who loved watching him corner his guests, making them stumble. But Stallone? He just sat there, arms draped over the chair. Relaxed. Unbothered. He scratched his chin, let the silence hang in the air. Then, finally, he spoke. "You mean, do I think being strong is a bad thing?" Halstead smirked. "I think strength comes in different forms. Maybe toughness isn't about dominance anymore. Maybe real strength is about vulnerability." A few claps from the audience. Halstead was warming up, but Stallone? He just leaned forward. "Let me ask you something," he said, voice low, steady. "If someone breaks into your house tonight, do you want a tough guy there?" The room went still. A few murmurs. A couple of heads turned toward each other. Halstead shifted in his seat. "Well, Stallone didn't let him finish. "Or do you want someone who's going to sit down and talk about their feelings?" Boom! Scattered laughter. A few claps. Halstead forced a chuckle. Adjusted his tie. He wasn't losing control. Not yet. "All right," he said. "But let's be honest, Mr. Stallone. Hollywood has glorified violence for years. Wouldn't it be better if we promoted heroes who solve problems without aggression?" Stallone blinked. Then, without hesitation, he said, "You ever seen a movie where a guy saves the world by filling out paperwork?" The audience erupted. Real laughter this time. Some of Halstead's own crew smirked behind the cameras. Halstead's fingers tightened around his cue cards. This was not how this was supposed to go. He sat up straighter. "Time to take back control. So what you're saying," he said, voice measured, "is that traditional masculinity, toughness, dominance, power, still has a place in today's world?" Stallone smirked. "Man, let me tell you something." He stretched his arms across the back of the chair. "You ever meet a firefighter? A cop? A soldier? Hell, a single mom working 2 jobs to keep food on the table?" Halstead hesitated. "Well, sure. You think their toughness is the problem?" Stallone shook his head. "No, man. Their toughness is what keeps the world running." The audience clapped, louder this time. Halstead could feel the shift. This wasn't going the way he had planned, but he still had one more shot. He leaned in, lowered his voice. The gotcha moment was coming. "But Mr. Stallone," he said, "you have to admit, society is changing. People are starting to question traditional masculinity. Some say that your kind of old-school toughness actually divides people, that it stops them from being vulnerable, from connecting." Stallone exhaled through his nose, tilted his head slightly. "Have you ever seen a building being demolished?" Halstead frowned. "Excuse me?" "A demolition," Stallone said. "Have you ever watched one?" "Well, yeah, I suppose." "How long does it take?" Stallone asked. Halstead blinked. "What?" "To bring a building down." "How long?" I don't know. A few seconds?" Stallone nodded. "But have you ever seen one being built?" Silence. "That takes years," Stallone said. "Brick by brick, steel by steel. People working day and night, laying the foundation, making sure it lasts." Halstead's jaw tightened. "The people with the detonators?" Stallone continued. "They don't care about that. They don't care about the work, the sweat. They just want to see it come crashing down." The audience was locked in. "You say society is changing," Stallone said. "But changing into what? People get so caught up tearing things down, they don't even stop to ask if what they're destroying was actually worth keeping." Boom! The crowd erupted. Halstead could feel it now. He wasn't just losing the interview. He was losing the room. But he wasn't done. Not yet. He leaned in, voice softer. One last move. Okay, Mr. Stallone, he said. So tell me, if toughness is so important, why do so many people push back against it? Why do so many people think it's outdated? Stallone didn't answer right away. He just watched Halstead, let the question hang in the air. Then he smirked and said, because weak people don't like being reminded they're weak. The audience exploded. Some stood up, clapping. Others just sat there, stunned. Even Halstead's own camera crew exchanged looks. Halstead opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Stallone let the reaction ride out. Then he sat back, arms draped over the chair, and added one final thought. Look, he said, voice calm. I'm not saying everybody needs to be some action hero. I'm saying life's going to throw punches, whether you like it or not. And when it does, the world isn't going to care about your feelings. He leaned in. It's going to ask you one question. The audience held their breath. Can you take the hit and keep moving forward? Silence. Dead silence. Halstead had nothing. No comeback. No quip. And outside the studio, something was happening. Because the second this interview hit the internet, the world wasn't going to be the same. The moment the interview ended, Halstead barely managed to keep his professional smile intact as the cameras cut. But Stallone? He just stood up, stretched, gave the audience a small wave, and walked off the set like nothing had happened. Backstage, chaos. Producers are scrambling. Halstead's earpiece buzzed with frantic voices. That did not go as planned. Social media is already picking it up. Cut the controversial parts before we post it online. But it was too late. Someone in the live audience had already uploaded clips. Within minutes, Fire the Internet was on fire. Fire. Stallone humiliates TV host on live television. Sylvester Stallone destroys woke media. This is why we still need real men like Stallone. Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. People clipped the best moments. Added reaction memes. Slow motion replays. Dramatic background music. The clip hit 1 million views in hours. By morning, #1 trending. The comment sections? A war zone. I don't even like Stallone's movies, but this was incredible. He said what everyone's been thinking, but too scared to say. Notice how the host had nothing when Stallone turned the tables? Classic. Of course, the backlash wasn't far behind. Just another aging celebrity stuck in the past. Toxic masculinity at its finest. Can we stop pretending this guy is some kind of intellectual? Halstead's network? Skull panic mode. Skull. They released a carefully worded statement about how differing opinions spark meaningful conversations. Halstead himself went on Twitter. Healthy debate is important. I respect Mr. Stallone's views, even if I don't agree. Let's keep the conversation civil. Police Scarlight, nobody cared. Police Scarlight. The internet had already decided who won. Fire Stallone didn't just win the interview. He won the narrative. Fire. But what did Stallone do? Nothing. No tweets. No statements. No press. He just went about his day, unbothered. Because unlike the people arguing in the comment sections, he had nothing to prove. But as the dust settled, a bigger question started floating around. Was this just another viral moment? Or had Stallone exposed something deeper about modern media? Police Scarlight, meanwhile, in the real world. Police Scarlight. Days passed, but the clip refused to die. Fire was everywhere. Fire. Morning shows. Podcasts. Even mainstream news segments started dissecting what it all meant. Some called it a wake-up call. Others labeled it a manufactured controversy. But one thing was clear. People weren't just talking about Stallone anymore. They were talking about something bigger. On one side, people argued. Stallone exposed the hypocrisy of modern media. They expect celebrities to just nod along, but the moment someone thinks for themselves, they freak out. Hosts like Halstead love to push an agenda, but they fold the second they're challenged. On the other side, critics claimed, Stallone is just another rich actor clinging to outdated ideas. It's easy to preach toughness when you're living in a mansion. And then, something unexpected happened. Police Starlight, real people started speaking up. Police Starlight, firefighters, police officers, military veterans, factory workers, construction crews, single moms, the people who actually knew what toughness looked like in the real world. A viral Facebook post from a retired Marine. Stallone gets it. Strength isn't about being a bully. It's about standing up when life knocks you down. We need more of that. A mother from Oklahoma posted a video. I raised 3 boys on my own. If I hadn't been tough, they wouldn't have eaten. Don't tell me strength is a bad thing. A quiet clip of an older man at a gas station went viral. He was watching the interview on his phone, shaking his head. These kids don't know what real struggle is. They think life's about debating nonsense on TV. Stallone? He understands real life. Meanwhile, Halstead? Skull silent. Skull. His network tried to push other stories, tried to shift the conversation. But every attempt was met with one question. Stop sign. Why did a Hollywood actor have more common sense than a professional journalist? Stop sign. And that's when the real conversation began. Not about Stallone, not about Halstead, but about the bigger picture. Had modern society really gone soft? Were people so afraid of real strength that they wanted to pretend it wasn't necessary? Was the media actually shaping culture? Or were they just controlling it? These weren't just viral talking points anymore. They were dinner table conversations. People weren't just watching. They were waking up. And Stallone? He still hadn't said a word. The conversation was no longer about an interview. It wasn't even about Stallone. It was about something much bigger. A week later, Stallone finally broke his silence. Not through a press release. Not on social media. Not in a carefully crafted statement. It happened during a casual interview in a small gym in San Diego. A local reporter, one of the few who still did real journalism, had been following the viral moment. She wasn't looking for a scandal. She just wanted to know the truth. As Stallone wiped the sweat from his forehead, she asked, "Did you expect the reaction to be this huge?" He took a sip from his water bottle and shrugged. "Look, I wasn't trying to prove anything. I was just being honest." The reporter pressed, "But do you think what you said resonated because people feel like toughness is under attack?" Stallone chuckled. "I've been around a long time. People always act surprised when someone tells the truth. That's the world we live in now. No grand statement. No victory lap. Just a man who said what he believed and moved on." But outside that gym, something was happening. Mark Halstead's show had taken a hit. Ratings dropped. The network quietly pushed him into different segments, away from high-profile interviews. He wasn't canceled, but he wasn't the same rising star either. Meanwhile, something unexpected started happening. People began re-watching Stallone's old interviews, his speeches, and even his movies, seeing them in a new light. Clips of Rocky Balboa's famous monologue resurfaced. It's not about how hard you hit. It's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward. People started using it in discussions about grit, resilience, and real strength. And outside the online debates, in the real world, something shifted. Young men started showing up at boxing gyms, pushing themselves harder. Parents talked about teaching their kids discipline instead of entitlement. Workers found themselves standing a little taller, pushing through struggles instead of complaining about them. Not because Stallone told them to, but because they saw the difference between real strength and performative weakness. This wasn't about one interview. It wasn't about Stallone versus Mark Halstead. It was about a world that had forgotten what toughness actually meant. And one man who reminded them. But Stallone? He wasn't sitting around watching the internet react. He had moved on. A week after the interview, he was in Texas visiting an old friend. Not a Hollywood friend. A real friend. Jack Russo, a retired firefighter, the kind of guy who had spent his whole life running toward danger instead of away from it. Jack had saved lives. Not on the big screen, not in a script, but for real. And now, he owned a small bar on the outskirts of town where regular guys stopped in for a cold beer after a long day. The kind of place where people still shook hands, looked you in the eye, and meant what they said. When Stallone walked in, Jack was already behind the counter, pouring drinks. He looked up and smirked. "So, You finally decided to stop by, huh? Stallone grinned. Thought I'd see if you're still ugly. Jack let out a deep laugh, shaking his head. Yeah. You want a drink, or are you just here to waste my time? Depends. Do you still have that garbage beer you always serve? Jack slid a bottle across the counter. Drink up, movie star. The bar was quiet that night. A few regulars scattered around, some watching the game on TV, others nursing their drinks in silence. Nobody bothered Stallone. Not here. Not in a place where people didn't care about headlines or viral moments. But there was one guy, maybe mid-30s construction worker by the look of him, who finally worked up the nerve to speak. Hey man, I saw that interview. Stallone looked up. The guy hesitated. That was something else. Stallone nodded. Yeah? The guy took a breath. Yeah. But I mean, people don't talk like that anymore. Stallone smirked. That's the problem, isn't it? The guy chuckled, shaking his head. You know what's funny? My dad used to tell me the same thing you said in that interview. That the world doesn't care how you feel. That you have to be strong, have to keep moving. He paused. I guess I forgot that for a while. Stallone just nodded. The guy tapped his beer bottle against the counter. But hearing you say it, man, I don't know, made me think. Stallone didn't say anything for a moment. Then he raised his own bottle, tapping it against the guy's. Here's to remembering. The guy smiled, took a sip, and turned back to his drink. Nothing more needed to be said. Jack watched the whole thing from behind the bar, shaking his head. You're going to start a revolution, you know that? Stallone smirked. No, man, just telling the truth. Jack poured another drink. Yeah, but these days, that's enough. The next morning, Stallone woke up early. Jack's guest room was small, just a simple bed, a nightstand, and a window overlooking the quiet Texas landscape. No luxury, no distractions. And for the first time in a while, Stallone liked that. He stretched, got dressed, and headed downstairs. Jack was already up, frying eggs in the kitchen. Morning, movie star. Stallone smirked. Are you always this cheerful in the morning? Jack shrugged. Some of us actually wake up before noon. Stallone grabbed a cup of coffee and leaned against the counter. Jack glanced at him. So what's next? Stallone took a slow sip. What do you mean? Jack set down the spatula. Come on, man. That interview. That whole mess. People are still talking about it. Stallone exhaled. I don't have a plan. Jack, I just said what I felt. That's it. Jack smirked. Yeah? And now half the country's got your back. Stallone shook his head. Man, I'm just an actor. Jack leaned on the counter, pointing at him. No, not anymore. That interview wasn't about movies. It was about people. And people don't hear a lot of truth these days. Stallone sighed, rubbing his temples. I didn't ask to be some kind of voice for anything, Jack. Jack just grinned. You didn't have to. The truth's got a funny way of putting you in the spotlight, whether you want or not. Later that afternoon, Stallone took a drive. He needed to clear his head. Small Texas roads. No traffic. Just miles of open sky. He pulled into a gas station somewhere off the highway. While filling up his car, he noticed a young man, maybe 18 or 19, sitting on the curb, looking lost. The kid had a duffel bag, a worn-out hoodie, and a look in his eyes like he had nowhere to go. Stallone watched him for a second, then walked over. Hey, kid. The young man looked up, hesitant. Yeah? Stallone sat down on the curb beside him. Are you all right? The kid hesitated. Then he let out a breath. Not really. Stallone nodded. Want to talk about it? The kid glanced at him, then did a double take. Wait, you're Stallone. Stallone smirked. Yeah, that's what they tell me. The kid chuckled weakly, rubbing his hands together. Man, this is crazy. Stallone leaned back, stretching his legs. Crazy how? The kid hesitated again. Then, finally, he sighed. I don't know what I'm doing, man. Everything's a mess. Family, school, life. It's like I have no direction. Stallone nodded slowly. Yeah, I know that feeling. The kid looked at him, confused. You? Come on, man. You got it all figured out. Stallone let out a short laugh. Nah, kid. Nobody's got it all figured out. Not even me. Stallone sat back on the curb, watching the kid as he rubbed his hands together, staring at the pavement. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, Stallone exhaled. Let me ask you something. You ever seen Rocky? The kid let out a small chuckle, shaking his head. Dude, out of course. Stallone nodded. Then you remember this. It isn't about how hard you hit. It's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward. The kid's smile faded slightly. He stared at the ground. Yeah, but what if you don't even know where you're moving? Stallone thought for a second, then patted him on the shoulder. Then you take the first step, and you keep going. The kid looked up at him. Something in his eyes had changed, like he was really listening, like he needed to hear that. Stallone stood up. You got somewhere to be, kid? The young man sighed. Not really. Stallone reached into his pocket, pulled out a few folded bills, and handed them over. Then go find out. The kid stared at the money. Then, at Stallone. I can't take this, man. Stallone smirked. You can, and you will. And when you figure things out, you pay it forward. The kid swallowed, then slowly reached out and took the cash. Thanks, man. Stallone patted him on the back. Don't thank me. Just don't quit. And with that, he turned and walked back to his car, leaving the kid sitting there, still lost, maybe. But now, he had something to hold on to. That night, Stallone sat outside Jack's bar, staring up at the Texas sky. Jack walked out, beer in hand, and leaned against the railing. Are you all right? Stallone nodded. Yeah, just thinking. Jack smirked. Dangerous habit. Stallone chuckled. Jack took a sip of his drink, glancing over at him. That kid at the gas station. Do you think he'll be okay? Stallone was quiet for a moment. Then he exhaled. I hope so. Jack studied him for a second. You know, maybe you don't need a plan. Stallone raised an eyebrow. Jack grinned. Maybe just showing up, saying what needs to be said, maybe that's enough. Stallone nodded slowly. Maybe Jack was right. Maybe the world didn't need another celebrity. Maybe it just needed someone to remind people what real strength looked like. The next morning, Stallone woke up to the sound of his phone buzzing. He ignored it first, but kept buzzing. Sighing, he grabbed it off the nightstand and glanced at the screen. 200+ missed calls, 500+ messages, and a name flashing at the top. His agent. Stallone sighed, rubbing his face. He already knew what this was about. Reluctantly, he answered, Yeah? The voice on the other end was frantic. Sly, where the hell have you been? I've been calling all night. Do you see what's happening? Stallone yawned, stretching. Relax, Jimmy. Relax. Stallone, the internet's on fire. That kid you talked to at the gas station? He posted about it. The whole damn thing. And guess what? It's viral. Like, bigger than the interview. Stallone froze. Wait, what? Jimmy kept going, his words spilling over each other. The kid made a video. Said you changed his life. Said you gave him hope when nobody else would. He told the whole story, man. And now, people are calling you a real-life Rocky. The internet loves it. Stallone sighed. Man, I wasn't trying to go viral. Yeah, well, too late. Every news outlet is picking it up. Talk shows are inviting you. Podcasts, interviews, everything. People want to hear what you have to say. They want to know why you care. Stallone ran a hand through his hair. Jimmy, I'm not getting dragged into this media circus again. Jimmy groaned. Sly, listen. This isn't like last time. People actually agree with you. They see you as the guy who's standing up for the forgotten ones. The people who still believe in hard work, discipline, and real strength. You have a chance to turn this into something bigger. Stallone leaned back against the headboard, staring at the ceiling. He never wanted any of this, but somehow it kept finding him. That night, Stallone sat on the porch, phone in his hands. Then, for the first time since all this started, he posted something. Not an interview, not a statement, just a simple message. One conversation can change everything. Be the person who listens. Be the person who reminds someone they're stronger than they think. That's all it takes. Within seconds, it exploded. Likes, comments, shares. People weren't just watching anymore. They were talking. And that's when Stallone realized. This wasn't about him. It never was. This was about something bigger. And whether he wanted it or not, he had just become the guy who reminded the world why real strength still mattered. The world was watching. But Stallone wasn't playing the game. He wasn't taking interviews. Wasn't sitting down with talk show hosts. Wasn't making viral speeches. He had said what he needed to say, and that was enough. But the world? The world wasn't done listening. A week passed. The video of Stallone and the kid at the gas station kept spreading. It was everywhere: news broadcasts, reaction videos, podcasts. But it wasn't just talk. Something had shifted. At boxing gyms across the country, new faces started showing up. Not just athletes, not just kids looking for a sport. Men in their 20s, 30s, and 40s, guys who had never thrown a punch in their lives, were walking into gyms, signing up, and lacing up gloves. Not because they wanted to fight, but because they wanted to be something more. Disciplined, focused, resilient. They wanted to learn how to take a hit and keep moving forward. And all because one conversation reminded them that strength still mattered. Meanwhile, Stallone stayed quiet. No press appearances, no interviews, no grand statements. But the world kept talking. It wasn't about Rocky anymore. It wasn't even about the viral moment. People were looking around at society and asking the questions Stallone had forced into the conversation. Have we forgotten what toughness really is? Some praised him. Some mocked him. Some called it an overreaction, a nostalgia trip for outdated values. But whether they loved him or hated him, one thing was clear: they couldn't ignore him. One morning, Stallone sat in a small coffee shop, flipping through the newspaper. He wasn't reading the headlines. He already knew what they were saying. Instead, his eyes landed on something else. A short column is buried near the bottom of the page. A story about a group of young men in Philadelphia who had started a training program for struggling teenagers, using an old boxing gym that had nearly shut down. The headline? Building Fighters, Not Victims. He read through the article, sipping his coffee, a faint smirk on his lips. Not bad. That same day, his phone buzzed. "Jack," Stallone answered with a sigh. "Let me guess. You calling to tell me I'm a big deal now?" Jack chuckled. "Nah, I just figured you should know. Somebody left a package for you at the bar." Stallone frowned. "A package?" Jack grunted. "Yes, small box. No name. Just said it was for you." "What's inside?" "Not my job to open other people's mail, movie star." Stallone sighed. "Guess I'll swing by later." Jack snorted. Yeah. Just don't take all day. I have a business to run." That evening, Stallone walked into Jack's bar, the familiar smell of aged wood and old whiskey hitting him as soon as he stepped in. Jack was behind the counter, polishing a glass. He nodded toward a small cardboard box on the bar. "There's your mystery gift." Stallone picked it up. It wasn't heavy, just a simple brown package, sealed with clear tape. He tore it open. Inside was a single item: a pair of boxing gloves. Not new, not fancy, old, worn, used, and tucked inside one of the gloves was a note. Handwritten. Stallone pulled it out and read the words slowly. "Didn't quit. Thanks, Sly." No name. No return address. Just that. Jack leaned over, raising an eyebrow. "Let me guess. That kid from the gas station?" Stallone stared at the gloves for a moment. Then he smirked. "Looks like it." Jack nodded approvingly. "Well, guess you did something right." Stallone exhaled, running a hand through his hair. He set the gloves down on the bar, drumming his fingers on the old leather. Jack watched him carefully. "So what now?" Stallone took a slow breath. Then he smiled. "I think I just got my answer." Because at the end of the day, it was never about one interview. It was never about social media or trending moments. It was about a kid. One kid. A kid who had been sitting on a curb, lost, ready to give up. And now he was standing. Now he was fighting. Now he was moving forward. And if that was the only thing that came out of all this, then it was worth it. A few weeks passed. The internet moved on, as it always did. New stories, new controversies, new distractions. But something was different this time. This wasn't just another viral moment. Something had stuck. More gyms were filling up. More young men were stepping into rings, picking up weights, and pushing themselves harder. Not because they wanted to be famous. Not because they wanted to prove something to the world. But because for the first time in a long time, they understood what real strength looked like. And they wanted to build it. Meanwhile, Stallone had disappeared from the spotlight again. No press tours. No talk shows. No media circus. Just quiet days spent training, reading, and thinking. The world could talk all it wanted. He had already said what he needed to say, and that was enough. One morning, he was sitting outside a diner in Texas, sipping black coffee, when a familiar voice called out, "Hey, tough guy." Stallone glanced up. Jack stood there, hands in his pockets, smirking. "You gonna sit there brooding all day, or are you actually gonna say something?" Stallone chuckled, gesturing to the seat across from him. Jack sat down, sighing as he flagged down a waitress. She poured him a cup of coffee, then walked off without a word. Jack took a sip, then glanced at Stallone. "You hear about what's happening back in Philly?" Stallone raised an eyebrow. "With the gym?" Jack nodded. "Yeah, that kid? The one from the gas station? He's been training nonstop. Even started helping some younger guys who came in looking for direction." Stallone leaned back, staring at the sky for a moment. He had a feeling that was coming. Jack smirked. "Are you going to go see him?" Stallone exhaled. "Not, he doesn't need me anymore." Jack studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Yeah," he said. "I guess not." That night, Stallone sat on the porch of his cabin, staring out at the quiet landscape. He thought about everything that had happened. The interview, the backlash, the kid, and what came next. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through the news. More stories were popping up. Articles about young men finding discipline through boxing. A piece about an old-school gym reopening in a rundown neighborhood. A viral video of a father teaching his son how to throw a proper punch. It wasn't about him. It was never about him. It was about a reminder that strength wasn't toxic, that resilience wasn't outdated, that toughness still mattered, and that people, real people, were finally starting to wake up to it again. He put his phone down, stretched his arms, and stood up. Tomorrow was just another day, and he was going to train, not for a role, not for a camera, not for approval, but because that's what strong men do. They keep moving forward, no matter what.